Let the record show I selfishly use the Locked On Kings podcast as a place of personal healing and venting. Not only do the Sacramento Kings, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, manage to lose another very winnable game against a weak opponent at home, the Kings do so by blowing two separate double-digit leads. If you take nothing away from this podcast other than this, I'll have done my job. The Kings will not be taken seriously as any sort of contender or postseason threat until they manage to take their opponents seriously, regardless of their record or how big of a lead the Kings might have in a game. You are listening to Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. Time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News, here from inside the Golden One Center, where behind me, the wonderful crew here at the Golden One Center is taking out the Kings Court and preparing for a Bad Bunny concert. And you know what? Leave the stage up, right? Maybe the Sacramento Kings should not play a game at home for the remainder of this regular season, because I don't know what it is about this Kings team stepping into this building and believing they are invincible when they absolutely have not earned it, and it's certainly not the fault of the fans, and it's certainly not the fault of the city. But for some reason, this Kings team just does not play at home the same way they play on the road, whether it's taking this crowd for granted or just getting too comfortable sleeping in their own beds, wearing their home jerseys and walking in with too much swagger. Whether it's an opponent that the Kings should absolutely be beating, like the Chicago Bulls tonight, or it's the Kings getting up to a double-digit lead with still plenty of time left, but feeling like the game is already over, this Kings team cannot get out of their own way in their own building. And it's beyond perplexing. It's predictable. It's not surprising, but it's perplexing and frustrating. There is no other way to explain it other than one term. One term that if you're a Kings fan, you know very well. It's deeply ingrained into your soul. That term is Kangs. Man, when the Kings rear their ugly head, they seem to do it in this building more than anywhere else. But when the Kings show up, they make their presence known. They're like the Kool-Aid man busting into your living room through a wall. The Kings are unavoidable sometimes, and they will stare you in the face and unapologetically do what they always do, which is blow leads or lose games, regardless of how significant the game is, or the Western Conference playoff standings and the race for the playoffs, and whatever the circumstance, the Kings will find a way to stay consistent. And sometimes we've been begging for consistency here in Sacramento, and unfortunately the most consistency we get is consistently Kings. Kings lose to the Chicago Bulls tonight, 113-109, in a game where, like I said, somehow the Kings managed to even one-up themselves. Not only did they lose to a Bulls team they absolutely should be beating, they blew two separate double-digit leads. Now, the first one, not the biggest deal. The Kings had a 14-point lead in the first half. They blew it. 14 points in the modern NBA is next to nothing, right? A 14-point lead can disappear very, very quickly because of the scoring. That doesn't mean it should, and it certainly should not, at the rate that big leads disappear against the Sacramento Kings consistently this season. The Kings lost that 14-point lead in 6 minutes, right? They went into the ended the first quarter, went into the second quarter up big, feeling good. By midway through the second quarter, it was an even game again. And then, believe it or not, the Kings rallied for another mini run to end the half to take like a 6 or 8 point lead into the halftime break. Like, the 14-point blown lead is not terrible. We've seen it before. We see it a lot in the NBA. It's not just a Kings issue. But when you blow a double-digit lead, you overcome it. You respond to it. You build a 22-point lead that you had with just over 3 minutes remaining in the third quarter. Y'all, at that point, by NBA metrics, the Sacramento Kings had a 99.6% chance to win this game, up 22 with just over 3 minutes remaining on your home floor against a weak Eastern Conference opponent. A 99.6% chance of victory. And they blew it. Now, thankfully, that 22-point lead didn't evaporate as quickly as we've seen big leads evaporate. It took the Bulls 13 minutes and 56 seconds of game time to cut that lead down. But still, a 22-point lead late in the third quarter, well into the second half. We're not talking about 2 minutes into the second half. We're talking late third quarter, going into the fourth quarter. You're up by a significant margin, and that is blown. Your second blown double-digit lead of the game. If the Kings had only blown one double-digit lead, and it was that 22-point point lead, it would have been inexcusable. But to blow a 22-point lead after blowing a 14-point lead in the first half, responding to that and overcoming that, to fall into the same pitfall twice in the same freaking game, it's inexcusable. Game of runs is a security blanket that I don't want to hear any Kings fans, any Kings players, coaching staff, nobody wrap yourself in that security blanket and just tell yourself basketball is a game of runs, and unfortunately, this is just the way it works. You'll score a lot of points, and then your opponent will score a lot of points, and then eventually whoever scores a lot of points last wins. Yes, runs happen in basketball all the time. Game of runs is an accurate term, but it is also something that can be used to brush the real issues under the rug. What are the real issues with the Sacramento Kings? In my opinion, when this Kings team gets up by double digits, especially at home, but we've seen it on the road too, when the Kings build a comfortable lead, or what they think is comfortable, which in the modern NBA is maybe not as comfortable anymore, but when the Kings build a double-digit lead, when they have had success, they are unable to sustain success. Why? It's not because of suddenly what other teams do. I give the Bulls credit for continuing to fight, especially on the defensive end of the floor. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. But when multiple opponents of all skill levels are able to consistently do this against you, it's not what they're doing, it's what you're doing. And what the Sacramento Kings are doing, in my opinion, is they're stepping off the gas. They're letting up. They're getting too comfortable, whether it's cockiness, whether it's arrogance, whether it's laziness, whatever the hell it is. They are taking a step back when they have not earned the right to do so, and when there's way too much time on the clock and way too much time remaining in a game in the modern NBA. I don't have to tell these players how quickly a team can score. Any team in this league can score. They know it better than I do. So why do they know it? Why has this Kings team experienced these blown double-digit leads so many times this season, and it continues to happen? It does not make sense. And if you don't want to just hear it from me, how about you hear it from Domantas Sabonis? How about you hear it from De'Aaron Fox, from head coach Mike Brown? I asked all three of them after the game about this trend of the Kings blowing double-digit leads, especially at home. Here's what all three of them had to say.
Domas, it feels like losing double-digit leads at home specifically has been a bit of a trend this season. Do you notice any kind of let-up, or this team maybe getting too comfortable with big leads, or is it just circumstantial?
I feel like it definitely is that, because we got the lead in one way, and we just got to keep doing the little things, all the small details. But yeah, I don't know, it's tough, we all see it, it starts happening, you want to start getting stops and playing the right way, but then by that point, it's the NBA. The other team gets going, and it's tough to stop them.
I mean, you look at any game, you look at the swings of a game. A lot of times one team ends up with a 15-point lead at some point. The other team probably has a 10-point lead at some point. So game swings in a variety of ways. We just have to be able to put a full game together, and then we have to be better down the stretch if they do get it back to a close game.
Fox, kind of building off that a little bit, you talk about the swings. I know with scoring at a premium, a 14-point lead isn't what it was 5 or 10 years ago. But can you speak on that just a little bit further? Is there a way that whether it's your team or in general, we should be looking at double-digit leads, you think, in the modern NBA, and what is a insurmountable lead versus what is very possible to come back from?
I mean, obviously with the amount of threes and how fast the game is played, leads are obviously not the same. But, I wouldn't say this team shoots they shot 32 threes today, but they're not a team that shoots a bunch of threes. But when a team's able to get stops and be able to turn you over, you're pretty much always in the game unless you're obviously down 50. Like that's, probably not coming back from that. But we have to be better executing when we do have a lead. I think we did well. In the third quarter when we got our lead, I think we were able to sustain. I think they made a run towards the end of the third quarter and kind of just leaked into the fourth quarter. But, at the end of the day, on the defensive end, we just have to buckle down and guard your guy. I think, most of DeMar's points were, I think it was probably mostly ISO. I don't think much was coming out of a pick and roll or him being on the opposite side with a tagger coming out to close out. There wasn't many of those. He just put his head down and he put them on his back.
Mike, this seems to be becoming a bit of a trend at home, the blowing double-digit leads. Do you sense or notice any let-up from the guys when they get up to what might feel comfortable, but in the modern NBA with the scoring isn't as comfortable as maybe it used to be?
Yeah, in our business, obviously, that teams can go on a run or the script can flip like that, and before you know it, you're in trouble. And I'm not sure if our guys took their foot off the gas per se. I feel like we didn't do what we should have done, and that was from the beginning, of the game. Even though we had gotten a couple of leads, we were still not doing a good job of moving the basketball, and they were turning us over, and that eventually caught up with us, not just from the turnover standpoint, but when we should have moved it and gotten great looks, guys hit a couple, now they're in rhythm. And, we weren't in rhythm the entire game from the three-point line, and we missed some that we probably would have made. And so more than anything else, if we're turning the ball over and it's messing with our rhythm a little bit from the three-point line, especially late, then maybe that's the case. I know we turned down a couple of threes late in the game, and we don't ever want to turn down threes. We turn them down and try to drive the basketball, and that's not who we are. So when that ball does get sprayed to you or swung to you and you're wide open, you got to let it fly.
I do appreciate the fact that Sabonis straight up agreed with me. Like, yes, we are taking our foot off the gas. And then you got different explanations from all three of them, right? De'Aaron Fox and Mike Brown to some extent talked about the Kings kind of stepping back defensively, letting up defensively. And surface level, you would think, okay, you've built a 14-point lead, you've built a 22-point lead. Offensively, you've done enough to give yourself a cushion. Now you have to defend it. So I understand defensively, if the Kings don't back off defensively, if they continue to play with defensive effort and clamp down, that doesn't allow a team to go on the runs and score the points that they need to close a gap. I understand that. But to me, where the alarm bells continue to ring with this team is on the offensive end. Sometimes the best defense is offense. You ever heard that overused cliche? Well, in the case of the Sacramento Kings, their offense is the best defense that they have. When you are up by 22 points or up by 14 points, make a team trade buckets with you. Even if they're chipping away by they hit a 3, you hit a 2. They hit a 2, you hit a 2. They hit a 3, you hit a 2. In those 6 possessions, they only made up 2 points. It's where Sacramento drops off offensively that is concerning to me. Because defensively, we know what this team is, right? We know this team is going to have defensive shortcomings. They may make good plays at times when we've seen them engaged and locked in defensively. We know they can do good things. But asking for a close to 48-minute defensive effort from this Kings team is a very tall ask considering the way this roster is constructed. But offensively, the Kings scored 20 points in the second quarter and 18 points in the fourth quarter. That, amongst one other major reason that I'm going to get to, that's why you lost the game. It's not because you didn't defend your big lead. It's because you stopped doing the things that built that lead in the first place. I understand Mike Brown's desire to not want to be a Mike D'Antoni type team that goes into the postseason and only scores a bunch of points, and if they're not scoring, they have no chance of winning, and they're a first or second or maximum third round flame out every single year. I understand that. Mike has said repeatedly, I have no interest in being that kind of team. I feel you, Mike. You know what it takes defensively to actually win a championship, so I trust you in that sense, but you got to have the roster to do it, and you don't right now. And I think Mike has made that question or made that reality abundantly clear to Monty McNair and this Kings front office. Changes are coming this offseason. You best believe it. And I think the first guy that's probably going to end up going, and it's not because I don't like him, but it's because he does not seem to fit Mike Brown's style going forward. I think Kevin Huerter is the first one getting shipped out this offseason. I love the guy. There is a disconnect in how Kevin Huerter plays and how Mike Brown wants to play. But Kevin Huerter is still too valuable to not play. And if Kevin Huerter's on the floor, you need to emphasize his three-point shooting over the defensive stops that he's not going to get you, right? 20 points in the second quarter, 18 points in the fourth quarter. You're blowing leads because you stopped scoring. Again, credit to the Bulls defense. They kept fighting. They do a good job protecting the paint. They did an excellent job against the Domantas Sabonis basically this entire game. Credit to them. But that is your primary strength in your own building, and you're struggling to score for too long a stretches, and it allows your opponent back in. On top of that, again, this is offense. This is not defense. You turn the ball over 18 times. Many of those self-inflicted wounds. The Bulls scored 24 points off of those 18 turnovers. That's the swing. That's the difference in the game right there. That's the reason why they were able to come back not once, but twice from double-digit deficits. Because you did not offensively do what you're supposed to do and score the basketball or take care of the basketball. The Bulls took advantage of that, and 10 of those turnovers came from De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. 10 of those 18 turnovers coming from your stars and your primary ball handlers. I get the defense needs to be better, and you need to defend your leads better. But you need to continue to score the ball. You cannot take a step back offensively. You cannot switch into cruise control on offense. You have not earned the right to do that. As good as you were historically last year, you're not the same team last year, or offenses have gotten even better this year. Cruise control does not work, especially in a playoff race, regardless of the opponent you're playing. Keep your foot on the gas pedal. Score the ball. Because the Bulls could not keep up with you if you scored 120 points like you're capable of doing every single night. You score 120 tonight, I promise you the Bulls don't even get anywhere close to the 113 points they got. They quit before that. But you took a step back on the offensive end, and it costed you. Now, like I said at the beginning of the show, and I'm going to talk about this more in a second, the Kings will not be taken seriously until they take their opponent seriously, regardless of their record or the lead that they have in a game. I'll expand on that more in just a second. Before that, though, I want to tell you about our great friends at Sackyard Community Tap House here in Sacramento. Tonight is a perfect night to have watched a game at Sackyard because maybe a little beverage or two could help nullify the pain a little bit. Now, of course, drink responsibly, and Sackyard Community Tap House is not a place that you go to go over the top and to go crazy and to party. It's not that kind of scene. Community is in their name for a reason. It is a place for you to gather with your friends, gather with your fellow Kings fans, enjoy community events, enjoy live music, enjoy a Sacramento Kings game, and enjoy a great live show that I have coming up on the Locked On Kings podcast here very, very soon. My first ever live Locked On Kings podcast is going to be happening April 1st. And I'll give you a little hint. 2 Kings legends, legendary figures in Kings media, 2 guys that you love and have heard a lot of on certain Sacramento Kings broadcasts. They will be joining me live for that podcast. I'll have more information about that coming up later, but you don't have to wait till that event to go to Sackyard. When you go to Sackyard to try their amazing beers on tap, their great local wines, as well as sodas and drinks for the kids, their great outdoor patio, whatever you're going for, make sure you mention Locked On Kings. You'll get 10% off your tab. Sackyard is your official home of the Locked On Kings listener. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by Grammarly. No matter what kind of work you do, how you communicate is key. All those emails, reports, and presentations are equally important to the collaboration needed to get things done, and Grammarly can help. Grammarly is your AI writing partner to help you communicate more effectively and efficiently so you can make a bigger impact at work, right? I wrote a lot of papers when I was a student. I was an English major in college. Grammarly, I wish I had that while I was working on all those papers, but I use Grammarly all the time for the emails that I craft at work, because the way I think I'm communicating versus the way that I'm actually communicating digitally, right? Sometimes the context is lost. Grammarly not only helps me keep the right context in mind, Grammarly adapts itself to how I like to write and how I like to communicate to make sure that I am delivering my message. It's not just words on a page, right? Grammarly has so many different tools. You can save time with one click and go from editing drafts in hours to simply seconds. 93% of professionals are using Grammarly Premium, and they report that it helps them get more work done. Grammarly is the gold standard of responsible AI with 14 years of experience and just about every IT certification under the sun. Make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download for free at Grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly, GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done. December 26th, the day after Christmas, the Sacramento Kings lost to the Portland Trail Blazers in Portland, 130-113. January 2nd, the Kings lost here inside the Golden One Center to the Charlotte Hornets, 111-104. February 7th, the Kings lost here in Sacramento to the Detroit Pistons, 133-120. And now tonight, March 4th, the Kings lost here inside the Golden One Center, 113-109. That does not include their massive blown fourth quarter lead against the Phoenix Suns. That does not include their blown lead late in the Dame Lillard buzzer beater game winner in Milwaukee. That does not include 2 losses in a row to the Houston Rockets. That does not include the other double-digit leads that the Kings have blown in this building. Those are just 4 games right there. 4 games against opponents that the Sacramento Kings absolutely should be beating. Now, I know this is not the way the world works, the NBA works, basketball works, and the schedule works. But these are the games that when you're in a playoff race, when every single win or loss matters, these are the games you look at and go, you should have had them. Right? Maybe you can get away with losing 1 or 2 of them. But to lose these 4 games, plus the other creative and stupid ways you found a way to lose this season against teams that maybe you shouldn't be beating, but in that specific night, you were better than and still found a way to lose. Right? If the Kings win those 4 games that I just listed there, they win those 4 games, they are 38-22 right now. 38-22 puts them comfortably in 5th in the West, and they're like a game behind the Clippers in 4th. But because they lose those 4 games plus those other honorable mention games like I talked about, this King team sits where they're at again, now in 7th. In the play-in, looking to still catch those top 6, and there's still a very good chance that they will catch the top 6. But Sacramento is making their lives way more difficult by not handling their business. When you talk about controlling your destiny is winning the games on your home floor that you should be winning. Not just the ones coming into the game where you know on paper you're the better team, but when you're up by 22 points late in the third quarter against the Chicago freaking Bulls, you should be winning that game. And yet the Kings find a way to lose. It's not that, like, obviously this Kings team is 8 games above 500, so we know they're not a bad basketball team. And we know they're capable of hanging with and beating anybody on a nightly basis. They just came off of a great win against the Timberwolves. They've beaten the Minnesota Timberwolves twice in Minnesota, the only team to be able to say that. They won a great hard-fought battle against the Clippers in Los Angeles a handful of games ago. We know this Kings team can be really, really good and can hang with anybody and beat anybody. Maybe that gives you a little bit of hope for the playoffs. Look, against the Western Conference, the Kings are 22-8 against all of the West except for the Clippers, Pelicans, and Rockets. The Kings are 1-8 against the Clippers, Pelicans, and Rockets. The rest of the West, they're 22-8. Against the East, they're 11-10. Still an above 500 record. Not as good as it absolutely should be, but here's what's important. The Kings are 3-7 in the last 10 games against the Eastern Conference. That does not include their blowout loss to the Boston Celtics, right? The last 10 times the Kings have faced the Eastern Conference teams Again, that's part of this playoff race. The Kings have not been able to get the job done. No disrespect to the East. There's some great teams over there, but you are failing when it matters to solidify yourself as a playoff team in the superior conference by beating and winning important games against opponents in the East that you should be beating. Again, those losses add up. Now, the Kings are 15-6. For context, they are 15-6 against sub-500 teams that are worse than 500. It probably feels to you like that record is worse. Still, those 6 losses, maybe all of them are inexcusable to you. Regardless, like, again, you clean some of those up and you win 3 of those 6 games that you've lost against sub-500 opponents. You're in a very, very, very difficult, different situation standings-wise than you are right now. The Kings just simply are not good enough to coast and to take anybody lightly. And I don't know if it's fair. Like, I've had the opportunity to, like, I've asked DeMontis, like you heard, about if they're taking a step back. I'm not in the position to where I can look De'Aaron Fox or look Malik Monk or look any of these guys in the eye and go, you are getting too cocky and you are not taking this game seriously, because I know that that's not fully the case. That being said, when patterns form, these are the only things that make sense. That this Kings team just do not play the same way against these teams that they should be beating as they did against the Thunder or the Timberwolves or the Clippers. If they play the same way tonight as they played against Minnesota without De'Aaron Fox, mind you, the Kings win this game by probably 30 points. Instead, and I know you're not going to be your best every single night. You're not going to hit a bunch of shots every single night. You shot 30% or around 30% from three-point range tonight. You normally live or die by the three-pointer. You shot that poorly from 3, and still you were up by 22 at one point. You did enough to win this game, or you were doing enough to win this game until you took your foot off the gas. It does not make sense. It truly does not make sense. I know there's been a lot made about the players-only meeting recently, right? Trey Lyles called the players-only meeting. I don't care who called it. I'm glad that it happened. It's good that a players-only meeting has happened. And there was a good response to it, right? Because after that players-only meeting, the Kings went and they beat the Timberwolves. I have no concern about this Kings team after a bad loss against a good team. I don't, because I know this Kings team is going to wake up and respond. That makes me feel better about a potential playoff series. But wasting this time, wasting the value of these games, learning how to be a great team that secures victories nightly on your home floor, even when you don't play your best, that is part of the next step, part of the evolution of this Kings team that they are not getting to. I'm glad that players-only meetings are happening and those discussions are happening in between games after bad losses, and they're talking up accountability and are aware of what's going on and trying to get better. I appreciate that, but who the hell is stepping up and saying something when things are unraveling? When what has happened tonight happens again and again and again. I know these players, they're experiencing it. They're going through it just like all of us are. They can all feel the, oh God, here we go again. They all know it's happening. Who in that moment is holding a mini players-only meeting and going, guys, wake up, lock in, let's not let this happen again? Who is that person? Because that, to me, is what this team is lacking. Yes, there's accountability in practice, in film sessions, in locker rooms, in private players-only meetings. Sure, there's accountability there. But where is the accountability? Where is the change in the middle of a game when you've just blown your second double-digit lead, but you still are more than capable of closing a game out? Or when you're falling apart while you had a big lead in Phoenix and it's all falling apart. Who is that guy? Who? And it needs to be a player, in my opinion. It needs to be a player. Some of you think it should be Mike Brown. I'm going to talk about Mike Brown because I see a lot of you frustrated with Mike Brown. I'm more team Mike Brown than I'm against Mike. There are some things that Mike does that are confusing to me, especially regarding his rotations. I'll jump into that as well, plus some of the dumbfounding numbers from tonight's game. We'll get into that still in just a second. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by Stitch Fix. You know that instant confidence boost that you get from an outfit that makes you look really good? That's what I get with Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, your size, and your budget. They do all the shopping for you. It's the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. You can easily upgrade your wardrobe this year with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that will work for you. All I gave was my size to my stylist, which for someone like me who is 6'4", built like a twig, has a weird waist size, way too long of legs, long torso, long arms, to have something that is fitted and made for me makes a really big difference. And they send me 5 just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice, and I keep what I like and what works, and I send back the rest. My stylist always sends just right pieces for me, and the fit is on point. It's like they have style ESP. I don't know how they do it, but they just get it right, even though they've never met me. This is a digital relationship, and they just get me as if I'm standing there working with them and talking with them about what I want to wear. It's style that makes you feel good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon. If you're frustrated at Mike Brown, I'm sure he's one of the many people that you're frustrated with. If you're frustrated in general and you're looking at all elements of the Sacramento Kings and saying everything has to be better, you're right. Mike Brown is certainly not excusable for what's been going on. You are the head coach. You are the leader. This team continues to make these mistakes, especially at home. You're the guy that has to answer for it. To some extent, you should answer for it. If this Kings team keeps falling into these pitfalls, you and your coaching staff should be recognizing it and addressing it, not just off the court, but on the court as well. So you might think, hey, Matt, there's the answer to your question earlier. Mike Brown and the coaching staff should be the guys calling the timeout, getting everybody together and go, let's not do this again. But Mike has made it perfectly clear, and I promise you this is not laziness on Mike's part. Mike has made it clear from the teams that he's worked with, the championships that he's won, the success that he's had as an assistant in under Steve Kerr in Golden State, and you've seen how Golden State has kind of fallen apart since Mike left, the time that he spent with Greg Popovich in San Antonio, the time that he spent coaching LeBron James in Cleveland, coaching Kobe Bryant in Los Angeles. Mike knows, and he's been very clear with it, that accountability also has to come from the players, that Mike cannot hold these guys' hand. When Mike first came into Sacramento last season, he became known and sarcastically known as the guy who took those really, really quick timeouts. And that bothered us at times, right? Many of you reached out to me on the podcast and went, I'm tired of these timeouts a minute, 2 minutes into the game. That was Mike recognizing a problem and trying to nip it in the bud quickly. Now, he still does that from time to time. But more often than not, this season, he's tried to allow this team and allow the leaders that he's empowered, Fox, Sabonis, Monk. He's tried to empower them to fix this issue on the fly. He doesn't use the quick timeouts as much as he used to. Maybe you feel like he should again. I don't know. But Mike has been consistent from day one that he is trying to put this team in a position to where he can sit back and let them lead themselves, not just look to their head coach for orders and for accountability every single time. I don't know if you agree with that approach or not. Obviously, it's not 100% working right now. But I think to some extent we have to trust Mike in him relaying that that's what it takes to be successful in this league. That being said, Mike does make rotational decisions that I do not understand. He leaves certain guys in the game too long, or he'll go and play a guy suddenly who hasn't played for a while and not play a guy who has been playing well. I don't know why Keon Ellis did not play in tonight's game. I asked him before the game about Davion Mitchell and Keon. Both of them played very, very well in Minnesota with De'Aaron Fox being out. And Davion got the opportunity to play tonight, had some good minutes. Keon Ellis does not play. Okay, I don't necessarily understand that. Chris Duarte got opportunity. Now, in the first half, Duarte gave the Kings some really, really good minutes. In the second half, Duarte got frustrated trying to guard Kobe White, who didn't take a freaking shot in the first quarter and still ended up with like a career-high 35 or 37 points, something like that. Kobe White went off. And he was getting frustrated. He ended up getting a technical foul at one point, which Mike pointed to post-game as where the momentum kind of shifted. So I'm not saying don't play Duarte. I'm not saying play Keon Ellis every game. Don't play Davion Mitchell. I think Mike is showing firsthand that he does not have consistent depth that he can rely on. He has guys that step up at different moments, but guys that aren't able to consistently replicate that, whether it's throughout a stretch of games or throughout an entire game. Guys will give you good minutes in the first half and then bad minutes in the second half. But I do also think Mike tries to experiment too much. And I do think Mike doesn't necessarily empower and put his players in the best positions to excel and doesn't necessarily emphasize their strengths as much as he should or as much as I felt he did last season when the Kings' offense was as prolific as it was. It's all part of the process. Mike is certainly not to blame. But I see people jumping down Mike's throat a little bit and getting on Mike a little bit and wanting to blame him for what's going on right now. And I am a subscriber, a believer in the Mike Brown thought process right now that what the Kings are working through, the breakthrough is going to come from the players, not from anything that he's going to say or do from his position on the bench where he never actually touches the basketball or does anything on the floor to actually impact the game. That's just my feeling on the situation. Some perplexing numbers from tonight's game before we wrap up. The Kings out-rebounded the Bulls tonight, 51-32. That's not just a blowout on the boards, that's a freaking slaughter. You out-rebounded a team by 19, and you still lost. Those rebounds led to a ton of second-chance opportunities. You scored 24 second-chance points and still lost. And finally, this number, that if it doesn't speak to exactly what I was talking about in the first segment of this podcast, that it's offensively where the Kings are not living up to how they're supposed to play, or they're not playing at their best offensively, and that's where the drop-off is happening. We know how good this Kings team is in transition, right? The Kings only had 8 fast break points tonight. That's not the most concerning thing. In 10 fast break opportunities, 10 fast break shots, the Kings went 3 of 10. They only converted 30% of their fast break opportunities tonight. Offensive drop-off. Not just defense. Offensively, they struggled to do what they do best, what they are known for, one of their primary strengths. They did not execute tonight, and they blew 2 different leads because of it. Now they have a day off. They'll practice, get back to work. Then they're in L.A. taking on a Los Angeles Lakers team that got a good win tonight against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I still feel that the Lakers are... I don't feel that the Lakers are that big of a threat to the Sacramento Kings is where they stand right now. But the Kings still play the Lakers twice in kind of a short span here coming up. You drop both of those games, suddenly the Lakers are a little too close for comfort, or certainly closer than you want them to be. But in addition to that, like, the Kings have the Spurs, the Rockets, the Grizzlies, the Raptors, the Wizards, the Jazz, the Nets, and the Blazers still to go. All teams under 500. 5 of those games are here at home. How much confidence do you have in the Sacramento Kings winning those games consistently? Because to me, those games are going to be just as important as the 2 games in a row against the Dallas Mavericks, or your game against Phoenix, or your game against New Orleans. Those games against those teams that are right there with you in the standings. Those games are super important. But you're not going to be in a position, in my opinion, to truly take advantage of big wins against those teams if you're not winning your games against the sub-500 teams, especially here at home. I hope the Kings figure this out down the stretch, because if they continue to lose games like this, they're going to be playing an extra game or 2 in the play-in, just trying to get to a best-of-7 series that they'll likely lose because they're the underdogs. Wake up time for the Kings, man. I'm tired of hearing about learning experiences. Tired of hearing about this team needs to figure it out, right? How many times do they need to be taught the same lesson before they learn and adjust consistently, not just a game or 2 after? We'll see how the Kings respond. Appreciate your thoughts. I appreciate you listening. I know you have thoughts. Share them. You're probably already getting loose in the comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit me up on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. On tomorrow's episode of Locked On Kings, I'm going to have Chris Biederman from the Sacramento Bee. He was on the road with the Kings when they got that good win in Minnesota. He was the one that initially reported the players-only meeting. We'll talk to him about that and more, his perspective on these blown leads and this playoff race as a whole, so I hope you will join me for that. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.